Chapter 4. The Art of Stalking and Its Practice. Stalking and the Separate Reality. According to the Don Juanist vision of reality, there exists a separate reality that is parallel with our ordinary reality. One fundamental aspect of the task of warriors is to reach this alternate reality, which will allow us to experience our world in its totality. In general terms, the perceptual velocity needed to be able to perceive this separate reality can only be achieved by a movement of the assemblage point. As has already been mentioned, this tends to be permanently fixed in place during the life of an average person. Lacking this movement, we remain anchored to the generally chaotic conditions of our ordinary reality. The separate reality, on the other hand, invites the warrior to freedom. It offers new worlds full of mystery, in which each being can experience itself in unsuspected ways. Don Juan outlines two general ways in which to achieve movement of the assemblage point: the art of dreaming and the art of stalking. In the present chapter, we will deal exclusively with the art of stalking, the control of conduct in the everyday world. The art of stalking takes place within the reality of the everyday world. It is practiced in right-side awareness. That is, it consists of an extremely careful and specialized handling of ordinary reality, with its final aim the penetration into this separate reality. The stalker is a consummate practitioner who makes the everyday world a battleground in which every act, every interaction with fellow humans forms part of the strategy. Stalking is the strategic control of our own conduct. Its field of action is the interaction that takes place between human beings, warriors or not. Therefore, the stalker, far from fleeing from the social scene, immerses himself or herself in it, using it to temper the spirit, gain energy, and carry the self beyond the limits of personal history. Stalking and hunting. The term stalking naturally reminds us of hunting. A stalker is one who observes, one in whom stealth forms an integral part of conduct. A hunter is necessarily a stalker, although only warriors would be able to apply this technique to every aspect of their life, converting its every element, including self and personal weaknesses, into their prey. The true hunter, as well as the stalker, well knows the difference between judgment and observation, between paying attention and thinking. If we wish to trap prey, we must first observe it. We must silently perceive what the prey does in order to know its routines, where it eats, when and what time it sleeps, its movements, and so forth. If our observation is effective, we will become familiar with these routines, allowing us to later devise a trap against them. The average person, unable to distinguish between thoughts and reality, confounds observation with judgment. We pass through life thinking things, generally negative, about the people around us or about ourselves, and this we call observation. The observation of the hunter, however, has nothing to do with criticism. Imagine for a moment what would occur if hunters, instead of observing the prey silently, begin to speculate about its qualities or defects, judging it as beautiful or ugly, interesting or boring. For example, in place of observing where and at what time it drinks water, imagine saying to yourself, "I imagine that this animal is accustomed to being thirsty around noon, and therefore it will have to drink water at the waterhole. Besides, it has a foolish-looking face, so it shouldn't be difficult to trap." Later, having taken your thoughts seriously, you are angry that your prey is far from the waterhole at midday. When hunters observe, there's no room for thought or internal dialogue. Everything is direct and simple. Merely observe what is there. Observation is one of the basic elements upon which the art of stalking is constructed. Another one is unusual behavior. Stalking and the assemblage point. In The Fire from Within, Don Juan tells us that the internal dialogue itself, together with everyday conduct, is what keeps the assemblage point fixed in one place. Then, any unusual conduct, if practiced continuously and systematically, tends to move it out of its habitual position. While it is true that there are many ways to move the assemblage point, it is also true that many of them can put our mental health in danger, since we are already disposed to believe that the reality we perceive is the only true reality. Examples of this would be the careless use of hallucinogenic plants, or confrontation with a severe emotional crisis that leads to psychosis. Even in the works of Castaneda, we find Carlos, the sorcerer's apprentice, concerned about going crazy from the effects of power plants or from the celebrated Nawal's blow. Stalking, on the other hand, implies a systematic control of our conduct, allowing a slow and harmonious movement of the assemblage point. We are thus assured that any contact with the unknown will be carried out with sobriety and efficiency. Stalking and success. The stalker's method is also the most efficient way to interact with people in everyday society. Since stalkers' moves are based on what is observed, not on what is thought, since the perception of reality widens with the movement of the assemblage point, since all acts are motivated by strategy instead of whim, they find themselves in a superior position in the realm of human affairs with respect to other people. Most people think in terms of a separate reality, assuming they even conceive of its existence in the first place in wild or phantasmagoric terms. They imagine a world of allies and beings that walk on walls. In actual practice, penetration into other realities might include experiencing unusual psychic phenomena, such as the dreaming body, communication without words, or perceiving living beings as luminous eggs. It also can include the realization that we are not condemned to live our lives under the yoke of our egos, that it is indeed possible to reinvent ourselves. We realize we can create new and more healthy ways to love, that the order we want in our personal world can be found within ourselves, not influenced by external factors such as inflation, world crisis, or the opinions of others. All of this is especially relevant to the art of stalking. Its practice endows us with very powerful tools for operating more efficiently in everyday society, propelled and sustained by an impulse that comes from somewhere else, from the otherness. This force, properly directed, can ultimately be devastating in a world where people are only familiar with the right side of reality. In summary, the art of stalking is observation, strategic control of our acts, stalking the self, the most efficient control of matters in the everyday world, and achieving movement of the assemblage point while maintaining sobriety and efficiency. It is the establishment of a bridge from the side of reality to arrive at the other self. Stalking in the work of Castaneda. The art of stalking forms one of the two great axes around which revolve the entire system of ideas presented in the work of Castaneda. The other being the art of dreaming. Any attempt at defining it would prove fruitless. First, because it cannot be understood through reason. Second, according to statements made in two of his late works, his writings, particularly that portion dealing with the mastery of stalking, remain incomplete. Only if one has a personal understanding of stalking can its importance within the totality of the ideas presented by Castaneda be fully appreciated. Nevertheless, I will try to summarize here the principal concepts of the art of stalking as they are dealt with in Castaneda's works. These concepts are not included in the technical portion of this book, even though Don Juan and later Florinda insisted on such concepts as pragmatic guides for action, principally because the result would be far too general and lengthy. I quote them here for the benefit of readers who may not have copies of Castaneda's works at hand, so they may better comprehend and apply the many stalking exercises that are included in the following section. The same comments apply to the stalker's strategy mentioned in the technique of the petty tyrant. Precepts of stalking. The stalker realizes the world is an endless mystery. The stalker must try to unravel this mystery, realizing that there is not the slightest possibility of doing so. The stalker regards him or herself as a mystery as well. Principles of stalking. 1. Always choose your battlefield. 2. Eliminate all non-essential elements. 3. Consider every battle a life or death struggle. 4. In difficult situations, relax, abandon yourself, while fearing nothing. Only then will the powers that guide you open the way for you. 5. Do not allow yourself to be overwhelmed. When you encounter forces greater than yourself, retreat for a moment and let your mind wander. 6. A stalker compresses time. Even an instant counts. 7. Never show your hand. A stalker is never direct with anybody. The 4 moods of stalking. Ruthlessness begins by not having compassion for yourself and is applied to all aspects of your life. Compassion is nothing more than another facet of self-importance. Ruthlessness has nothing to do with coarse behavior, however. Cunning relates to a type of sagacity that is closer to intuition than to intelligence. It does not imply cruelty, however. Patience does everything in its proper time. There is a right moment to take action. You must be patient, but active. It is not negligence, however. Sweetness is not taking yourself too seriously. The power to laugh at yourself permits you as a warrior to be gentle, charming, and at the same time, an annihilator. It is not to be confused with stupidity. Recapitulation, the stalker's stronghold. According to Don Juan, recapitulation is the stronghold of stalkers in the same way that dreaming constitutes the stronghold of dreamers. And it can be considered the basic practice that makes one into a stalker. Recapitulation is remembering, or more precisely, reliving. It is the bodily recovering of all past experiences. I consider recapitulation a fundamental technique for anyone, warrior or not, who is genuinely interested in self-liberation. For this reason, recapitulation is one of the first techniques I give to those participating in my workshops. I consider it by itself to be one of the most significant techniques in terms of its permanent repercussions in the lives of those who practice it. In Don Juan's terms, recapitulation is a very effective way to move the assemblage point, thereby connecting awareness to the other self. The recapitulation of a dying person. Recapitulation is a natural act. It is the last act of living beings just before the disintegration of their individuality, which is death. It happens to everyone just before the moment of death. People reviving after being declared clinically dead often will report that their whole life passed before them. This is not so absurd. We are because we remember. Our capacity to associate and remember is what gives us our sense of individual identity and continuity. It is natural that in the moment just prior to ceasing to be, we would remember all those events that caused us to identify ourselves as ourselves during our life. This is the moment when our I, in taking its leave, enjoys reliving for the last time all that it will no longer be able to remember, all that will no longer be. This experience of reliving the events of life is recapitulation. Those rare people who revive possess an increased capacity to appreciate their existence, living with a better sense of equilibrium, force, and decision-making than they had before. This is due not only to having been so close to death, which without doubt nourishes an awareness of life, but also to their having made a partial recapitulation of their lives. The burst of awareness. Castaneda states that once the body has completed its final recapitulation, a burst of total awareness occurs that lasts only for an instant before death itself, or what he calls the moment in which the ego consumes the awareness of the dying person. For only an instant, thanks to recapitulation, at the moment of death, we become pure awareness. Stalkers have a very keen interest in the super awareness derived from recapitulation, and they ask, why wait for the moment of death to recapitulate? Why not recapitulate before and make use of its power to change our lives now? This is precisely why recapitulation forms the basis of stalking. Discovering recapitulation as a means of liberating and developing awareness has universal value. It is not something that has to do only with sorcerers, stalkers, or strange entities. It is not done simply because we are all going to die and we all are going to recapitulate. The effects of recapitulation are too far-reaching to be ignored. Body memory. I want to make clear that recapitulation does not refer to ordinary memory. Recapitulation is the not doing of memory. While ordinary memories deal only with thoughts, recapitulation is more like a sense memory having to do with feelings. When we remember, it is the ego remembering by means of the internal dialogue, to which we add images. In recapitulation, on the other hand, it is the body remembering, and it does so by liberating the feelings stored within it. The vast majority of us are tied to our past, which is to be expected since it provides the support that the ego uses to justify itself. The past determines what we are and makes us feel justified in maintaining our everyday behavior, even though we may be aware that it is not good for us. A large part of our time is spent remembering the past. Only we don't realize that what we are remembering is not reality, but rather images fabricated by our internal dialogue concerning what happened to us. We don't remember facts, but interpretations of facts. We are unaware of our real past because we are too involved in repeating to ourselves a mythical history that our ego has developed to justify its existence. Nevertheless, the awareness of what we have lived and done is not totally lost. We possess an alternate memory hidden in the awareness of our other self, which has nothing to do with the interpretations of the ego, in which it is possible to recover. Recapitulation is a bodily experience contained in the totality of our being that allows us to relive the feelings implicit in the events being recapitulated. The information it provides generally does not coincide with what our ordinary mental memory says about our own existence. The failure of psychoanalysis. Allow me a very brief digression to discuss psychoanalysis. It often happens that when I speak of recapitulation, cultured people who are unfamiliar with it immediately associate recapitulation with psychoanalysis. Some of them say, yes, I have recapitulated already for 3 years with my psychoanalyst. Perhaps secretly they ask themselves, then why haven't I changed? The reason is that recapitulation and psychoanalysis are two entirely different practices. The first has to do with left side awareness, the second with right side awareness. The first comes from the body. The second originates in the internal dialogue. Recapitulation is the reliving of experiences. Psychoanalysis is an interpretation fabricated by thinking, which we call the past. In psychoanalysis, the ego of the patient, talking a great deal about itself, reinforces its belief in its existence as time goes on. Thanks to this self-justification, it affirms its place as the dominating force in the totality of the patient. Naturally, this is satisfying to the ego of the analyst, who, upon observing a certain prescribed behavior from the patient, feels he or she is indeed an analyst, thus justifying all those years of study at the university. And of course, the fee for such lengthy therapy would be no small matter either. Result? A patient who spends years as a patient suffering in the same existential wretchedness, but capable of explaining with complete precision the cause of his or her problems. Unfortunately, the patient remains incapable of changing anything. If it is clear that recapitulation does not involve ordinary memory, and it is the body and not the mind that carries it out, we can now discuss its effects. These include personal freedom, increased awareness, and an increase in energy. The chains of the past. Some have asked during recapitulation exercises in my workshops, why bother with our past when what really concerns us is the present? Haven't we been told to live in the here and now? These questions bring up a very important point concerning recapitulation. We are not dealing here with events that happened a long time ago, but with a past that is still in effect right now. These past events are still registered on our bodies and are in fact determining everything that we are and do. They determine our way of thinking, which things are easy for us and which things we find difficult, our strong and weak points, people who attract us and those we avoid, our way of dressing, our way of loving and experiencing affection. In short, all those characteristics that would be included under the headings of who I am and the way in which I live. Therefore, recapitulation is not remembering something that was and is no longer. Rather, it represents an encounter with something that continues to operate in us right down to the present moment, profoundly affecting each instant of our present life. Here and now, each person is tied to other persons, to an unlimited number of places, objects, and situations that are not apparent at first glance. All of these ties are, in reality, filaments of our luminosity that remain attached to those people, places, objects, and situations throughout our lives. Therefore, when we want to move, change, intend, or undertake something really new in our lives, we find we can't. We drag these attached filaments behind us like an enormous weight that keeps us fixed in our old routines, our old ways of living. The people with whom we interact may be different ones, but the events will repeat themselves. A doorway to freedom. From this, it can be deduced that recapitulation also represents a doorway to freedom. If we can know directly, without interpretations, how this ego was formed, what things we renounced, what promises from the past we secretly drag along behind, how it is that we come to believe who we believe we are. If we are capable of perceiving ego as a description fabricated during past stages of life, which therefore is not as real or definite as we had previously supposed, then it means we are capable of change. It means we are not condemned by this vulgar history called our past. This implies that if we know what our structured routines are, then we have the necessary information for determining which not doings would be the most appropriate for dismantling them, for erasing our personal history. We can then choose how to live and how to be, in what type of world we wish to live. We can abandon repetition and boredom and replace them with magic, amazement, and joy. Rescuing your quasi-memories of the other self. In The Eagle's Gift, when Castaneda refers to the quasi-memories of the other self, we are apt to imagine that such a thing, if it exists at all, would have to do only with sorcerers or some sect or cult. It surely would have no relevance at all in the experience of the average person. In that work, Castaneda relates how, after enormous efforts, he recovered his memories of long chains of events that took place while he was in a state of heightened awareness, but that were not contained in his ordinary memory. These experiences were contained in the awareness of his other self. Only through great effort on his part was he able to recover these quasi-memories of his other self. Remembering the magnitude of those events that had such a profound effect on his life provoked an enormous upheaval in him that left him stupefied, exclaiming, "How could I have forgotten something so tremendous?" The reality is that each of us, as a human being, has our own quasi-memories of our other self. These are not experiences with sorcerers in states of heightened awareness, of course. They refer to profound, definitive experiences in the past for which, as in the case of Carlos, the only relief was to forget them completely. When the ego runs up against something that does not fit with its description of the world or of the self, the trauma can be so great that it simply discards the experience or somehow explains it away. Those who recapitulate their lives then express the same perplexity as Castaneda. How could I have forgotten that? They forget because the events that occurred were not impressed upon ordinary memory, but upon the parallel memory of the other self, whose report about their existence would be quite different from that of their ego. In some part of our body, taken as a field of energy, are hidden the quasi-memories of our other self. In these memories are the mechanisms that close the way to many of the experiences that we long for, but that appear to be out of reach. Promises made are an example of what might be found in quasi-memory. The promise. A clear example of the promise is given in a separate reality, when Don Juan forces Castaneda to remember a promise that had been forgotten in his ordinary memory, but which nevertheless continued to exert its force on his life. It had to do with the little boy with the button nose. As a boy, Carlos had to wage great battles against other children, the kind that many children wage against the cruelty and mockery that often characterize childhood relationships. These are the battles that determine who is strong and who is weak. With great effort, Carlos achieved supremacy, becoming one of the strong ones who made fun of and dominated the other children. One of his favorite victims was little Joaquin, a first grader whom Carlos picked on frequently without really being aware of it. In spite of this, Joaquin had a great admiration for Carlos and followed him everywhere. On one occasion, Carlos went too far. He deliberately toppled a heavy blackboard over on his little admirer, breaking Joaquin's arm in the process. The impact of seeing little Joaquin on the floor crying, with fear in his eyes, and not understanding the reason for it all, shocked Carlos into promising himself that if little Joaquin were healed, never again would he be the dominator. Until Don Juan forced him to remember this event, Carlos had unknowingly carried the weight of his promise around with him. All of us have similar promises hidden away in some part of our being. Discovering them, knowing them, provides us with an opportunity to determine whether such promises are still relevant or whether it is time to rid ourselves of them. Recapitulation is the best means of accomplishing this, to re-encounter our quasi-memories of our other self. It represents an opportunity to know who we truly are. Sealing black holes. The most important effect of recapitulation is increasing our energy. In the multiple interactions we have with other human beings, we experience painful moments in which we lose parts of our luminosity, particularly in a strong emotional exchange. We experience a great loss of energy as complete parts of our luminosity fall off and are left behind. After such interactions, we never again feel complete, secretly feeling we lack something, although we are not sure what it is. Using Don Juan's terminology, we would say that holes form in our luminous egg through which energy is continually being drained and wasted, thus weakening our equilibrium and power. That these energy holes are a constant drain can be observed in the lives of average people. There is a tendency to repeat the debilitating routines that begin with some painful emotional exchange. That is, starting from the formation of one of these holes. A common example of this happens in the separation of lovers. The abandoned partner feels as though a part of the self is lost. There is a physical pain in the umbilical region of the abdomen. This is not allegorical. In Western society, the tendency toward possessive love produces such a strong bond in the luminous fibers between the partners that any separation results in the mutilation of at least one partner. So that person would probably remain feeling incomplete forever. And as we know little about love, being concerned instead with property, so also we know little about life, and we are not in the least concerned with the fact of our inevitable death. We are so ill prepared to know about our own death that when it comes, something will be torn from us similar to what occurs in the separation of lovers. Recapitulation permits the recovery of energy lost along the way by providing us with the means to plug the holes in our luminosity. However, as we leave shreds of energy tied to past moments, places, people, and situations in our lives, so other persons have left part of their beings in us. They have left their mark on us, and by this they can disrupt our time and space, regardless of whether they are present or not, alive or dead. Because of this, many times I am not myself. I am someone else, my father, my mother, my kindergarten teacher, my best friend from long ago, an old love, or someone else. As I lose parts of my being to others, I also carry parts of others along with me, which prevents me from living a full life. Don Juan stated that these foreign filaments also form the basis of our capacity to feel important. Detaching these fragments unconsciously incorporated into our being is also achieved through recapitulation. Techniques. Since it is applicable to everything we do, the art of stalking encompasses an inexhaustible wealth of activities. I will, however, confine myself here to some of the basic exercises. The first 3 have to do with recapitulation, and the other 6 relate to other forms of stalking. Recapitulation procedures. There are many ways to recapitulate. While buried in the earth, with the help of trees, with another person, in a group, through massage, or through physical movements in a group. In our work groups, we have used several different techniques. The basic procedure for recapitulation is presented to us by Castaneda in The Eagle's Gift. Recapitulating inside a box. I consider this to be the most efficient and complete technique for general recapitulation. First, let me clarify that exercises of recapitulation and recapitulation proper are not the same. Exercises of recapitulation can bring us to recapitulate, but they do not in themselves constitute recapitulation. True recapitulation comes from the body without the help of any method or procedure. It has its own dynamics according to the way the body handles itself as a field of energy. There are even situations in which people in physical trauma or other types of crisis experience spontaneous recapitulation without their having realized it. The following is a systematic procedure to help the body to remember, and in this way to achieve a general recapitulation of your life. The recapitulation box. Using a box for recapitulation requires 3 elements: a list of events to recapitulate, special breathing techniques, the recapitulation box. Each of these elements constitutes a separate technique in itself. However, maximum effect is reached when they are used together. In very general terms, the procedure is as follows. 1. Make a list of all the events of your life, beginning with the present and finishing with the most distant, the event of your birth. And 2. Enter the box, and, by means of special breathing, recapitulate one by one each event from the present to the past. It seems simple at first glance. However, in actual practice, each element constitutes a technique involving a high degree of complexity, as we shall see shortly. I will develop it element by element and then clarify how they are interconnected. 9. The list of events. This technique involves a written list of the events we are going to recapitulate. In theory, this list should include all the events of our existence, beginning with the moment in which stalkers begin writing the list and finishing with their birth or before. Recapitulation can include prenatal experiences. Naturally, such a list would contain a practically inexhaustible number of events. The universe of our past would be too enormous to be functional. In practice, we begin to work first with the most significant events and those that spring readily to mind. Don Carlos himself suggests that we recapitulate our life by dividing it into areas. The information contained in his work, personal suggestions from Castaneda himself, and above all, the practical application of the exercise permit us to fine-tune this extremely simple method that consists of the following steps. 1. Select 3 areas of your life to recapitulate. 2. Divide each area into its component elements. 3. Divide each element into stages. 4. Divide each stage into its specific events. Areas. Choose areas that have to do with things or activities that have been with you for a good share of your life. Typical examples would include houses in which I have lived, love relationships, my family, my friends, my work, schools. The important thing is to be able to break the chosen area down into its elements. Choosing houses would be of little value if you have lived in only one house your entire life, or choosing lovers if you have never had one. Areas give you a sort of cross-section through time, allowing you to chart your entire existence without examining all the details. You can do without any events that do not readily appear in relation to a selected area. Elements within a given area. These are the specific units of the area listed one by one from the present to the past. In my chosen area was houses. I would begin the list if my chosen area was houses. I would begin the list with the house in which I currently live, then the house I lived in just before, and so on to my very first house. Houses. 1. Vallarta 49, DF, where I currently live. 2. The house in Azulejos, Veracruz, the house immediately prior to number 1. 3. Grandmother's house prior to number 2. 4. Sanchez house prior to number 3. 5. And so on and so forth until I arrive at 19, the house of my birth. If the chosen area has to do with persons, such as lovers or family, try to list its elements, names, in reverse time, order, as in the example above. Stages within a given element. This step can appear to be the most complicated, although it isn't really. Divide into stages each one of the elements, beginning with the one at the top of the list, and follow the same order from present to past. The most helpful method is to name each stage according to an event that in some way marks the beginning of the stage. To continue with my example, 1.1, the recapitulation list, current stage. 1.2, the books of Castaneda, from 1 year ago to the present. 1.3, remodeling the house. 1.4, grandfather's illness. 1.5, arrival at Vallarta 49. The names given to each stage are not taken as the events themselves, but as points of reference to orient yourself within some specific element. The time frame may vary a great deal in each case. The number of stages can vary depending on the time spent in a given element. However, it should never be less than 3. Between 5 and 10 is usually sufficient. If naming the stages is a problem, you can simplify things by calling the stages the 5th, 4th, 3rd, and so on down to 1st, arrival, at which initiates the element. Events within a given stage. In this step, you detail your list with each one of the events that compose a given stage. Again, from the most recent to the most remote. Don't try to describe the event. Just find a name for it. Don't try to analyze. Simply register the event. Continuing with my example. 1.1, the recap list. 1.1.1, I write my list. 1.1.2, brunch with a friend. 1.1.3, talking with a neighbor. 1.1.4, weekend in Cuernavaca. 1.1.5, fixing the car. 1.1.6, I read about recapitulation. The number of events in each stage can vary greatly. A well-made list might have from 300 to 2,000 events, or even more. When your list is finished, it should form an enormous synoptic square of 4 columns. In the first, the name of the area. In the second, the elements of the area. In the third, the stages of the elements. In the fourth, the events that took place in each stage. The material can be organized as you choose, lists, number files, and so on. However, the synoptic square offers ease in making overall observations, which can be very revealing. It is very important to finish one column before going on to the next. That is, the list is worked on in a vertical direction, not horizontal. This allows you to go over the components of your life repeatedly, each time with greater attention to detail. This will help you to become progressively more aware of the general direction of your life, to keep from getting lost when registering periods of your life that stand out particularly or are confusing to you. Ultimately, you should understand that although the first columns help you to see your life from another perspective, only when you have finished the fourth will you be able to make maximum use of your list. It must be emphasized that this list is an exercise in stalking, not based on analysis, but on direct observation. The facts are simply registered without speculation or reflection. You also should avoid the tendency to leave out painful or shameful acts, which many times are the ones that demand a thorough recapitulation. The time and attention you spend making your list will afford proportionately superior results. Generally, this will take 2 to 12 weeks minimum. Working frequently, having one area completed is usually enough to begin using the recapitulation box. A list with 3 areas well chosen and finished can be considered rather complete. Although the list of events forms only one part of the technique of recapitulation, note that it can function very well by itself as a minimal form of general recapitulation. In my years of working with groups, I have observed the very noticeable effect that a well-made recapitulation list has on people's awareness and energy, even without doing a full recapitulation inside the box. By simply making the list, the body can be made to remember. Once the list is finished, it becomes the map of your existence, by which you can observe its repetitions, periods, and sequences, and thereby reveal a great deal about the structural axis of your life. Axes. 10. Breathing. Breathing is the magic element in the process of recapitulation, through which you can direct the repairs your body will have to make to its energetic structure. There are 3 types of breathing: inhalation, exhalation, the complete breath. A description of the first 2 is included in the Eagle's Gift. However, the description is not complete enough by itself for persons trying it on their own. It is done in the following manner. Inhalation is the principal respiration in the exercise of recapitulation. Respiration number 1. Its central element, as its name indicates, is inhaling. It is the respiration that pulls, that attracts. It is used during 2 specific moments: when beginning a session of recapitulation inside the box, and when, during the session, we find an experience in which we lost energy, some experience that left us incomplete. The effects of this respiration permit the practitioner to pass from simple remembering to recapitulation proper, as well as to aid in the recovery of luminous fibers that have been left along the way. To accomplish this, you must be relaxed in both body and mind. The spinal column must be straight, eyes closed. Begin by facing forward with the lungs empty. Without inhaling, turn your head until it faces over your right shoulder. Starting from there, rotate 180 degrees until you are facing over the left shoulder, all the while taking in a deep, slow breath until your lungs are completely filled with air. Both movement and breathing should be slow and synchronized. From the left shoulder, hold the air while turning to face forward. Then, slowly exhale, and you are back at the starting point. Make an almost imperceptible pause between each one of the movements. This can be done whenever and as often as you feel is necessary, although generally a few minutes are enough. Exhalation is the reverse of the first and is called exhalation or respiration number 2. Its central element is exhalation, and its purpose is to separate or detach. It is used during recapitulation when we find an experience in which filaments from other people become attached to our own luminosity, or when we encounter a promise we wish to be rid of. Respiration number 2 liberates the body of foreign elements and of promises that no longer need to be honored. It is done in the same position and with the conditions indicated in number 1, only in reverse. Begin by facing forward, inhaling slowly. Holding the air, turn to face over the left shoulder. Once there, slowly rotate your head 180 degrees while exhaling completely until you are facing over the right shoulder. Lungs empty of air, you turn to face forward again to the starting position. Your body will tell you, through feeling, when to stop. Also, the same slowness of movement, synchronization between breathing and movement, and pauses are observed, as in respiration number 1. The complete breath is used when we wish to clarify a scene from our past, to recover our sobriety, or simply when we want better concentration. Since this respiration forms part of other exercises, not only of recapitulation, a complete description of it will be found in Chapter 6, Exercise 46, on stopping the internal dialogue. (11) The recapitulation box. Fabrication. The box is a very powerful element in aiding recapitulation. It is both a tool and a symbol. As a tool, it helps the body to remember. As a symbol, it represents the limits of personal history in which we are held prisoners, the limits of the ego. The recapitulation box, as its name implies, is a box generally made of wood, which must be built while the person intending to use it is in a state of total concentration. Basically, it has the shape of a cube, with one of its 6 sides fitted with hinges to function as a door. It need not form a perfect cube, but it must be constructed in such a way as to reduce the space around the body to no more than 2 inches at its closest approach. Its shape should permit the practitioner to enter and sit down with the back straight and the legs crossed or drawn up against the chest to make the body as compact as possible. Allowance must also be made for adequate ventilation, while at the same time reducing light entry to a minimum. Other materials can be used, but wood is the best by virtue of the favorable influence that trees and tree products have on people. A casket built by the user may be substituted in place of the box, in which case the practitioner would do the exercise lying down. Since it is naturally associated with death, a casket will facilitate recapitulation to a great extent. If there is a tendency to fall asleep, a small rock can be placed in such a way as to make things too uncomfortable for sleep. It is best not to paint or draw designs on the box, or to build it in a form other than the basic cube. Pyramids, for instance, besides provoking all sorts of metaphysical interpretations, produce a different effect, one that might well be disturbing. The use of metal parts, nails, hinges, etc., should be reduced to a minimum. Any glue used should be organically based. Again, as with the list, the more time and concentration spent in fabricating the box, the more effective it will be in aiding us in our task. Inside the box. Now that your list is ready, at least one area with all of its 4 columns finished, you are familiar with the 3 methods of breathing, and your box is constructed. You can go to work. Before entering the box, you must examine the most recent events on the list and memorize them in order to recall them once you are in the box. Inside the box, you will be concerned only with the 4th column from your list, the events. The number of events chosen should be no more than you consider possible to recapitulate in a single session. Theoretically, you should recapitulate one by one the events on the list, beginning with the most recent and ending with the most remote. I say theoretically because in practice, when the body recapitulates, it takes its own direction that often is not according to the order of the list. Sometimes events will appear that are not on the list, and some you thought were very important pass to second place. Once inside the box, begin practicing respiration number 1 for a few minutes. Each of you will have to determine for yourself the exact time required for this. The events will begin to arise by themselves, however. You can help by making a conscious effort to remember. There is no harm if you begin by using ordinary memory. In fact, the effort you put into making your list, the special breathing, and the box all combine to aid you in passing from ordinary memory to recapitulation. You can also try less obvious ways to remember. For example, focus your attention on more minor aspects of a given event instead of its central theme. If, for instance, the memory is about a discussion, what were some of the details in the room? What color were the walls? Try to remember the feelings that were present rather than the words that were spoken. Body sensations are very useful. What did I feel in my knees? How did my feet feel? My stomach? What odors were present? Once the process has begun, use the breathing exercises as necessary. 1, to recover energy. 2, to detach foreign filaments and to liberate yourself from promises and decisions no longer relevant to your life. And 3, to recover clarity and sobriety. Once all the events on the list have been recapitulated, you must dispose of your box in a personal ritual that expresses the moment in which you have finally freed yourself from the confines of your personal history. The details of the ritual are strictly personal. The box should be burned or buried. The total time needed for a complete recapitulation depends on many factors: lifestyle, the intensity of the work, the length of sessions, their frequency, and so forth. In any case, you must take into account that time flows differently during recapitulation than it does in everyday life. If you consider that a dying person has time to do a complete recapitulation during the last moments of life, you can suppose that you also will not need years. Recapitulation is best done during the hours when most people are asleep, so as to be free of their extraneous thoughts. Also, doing it in an unpopulated area will enhance the experience. Outdoors among trees is even better. Preferably, the box should be left in one place for the entire duration of the exercise. This lends an air of ritual to the experience. However, ideal conditions for recapitulation are not mandatory. The important thing is to do it, no matter where. While some recapitulate for 1 or 2 hours, once or twice a week, others dedicate an entire weekend to it. It may take months to recapitulate the entire list. In workshops on recapitulation, participants have worked for 21 days straight, recapitulating all night. Beginning with preliminary exercises at 7:30 p.m., they enter the boxes an hour later and remain there until 5:30 a.m., when everyone else leaves to begin their daily activities. This is generally done in an unpopulated, forested area near the city. Contrary to what you might expect, no one is worn out or tired after a night of this. In fact, the effect produced is one of vigor, not only in terms of energy, but also of consciousness and sobriety. The participants, as a result, begin to see their daily world from a more profound perspective. It is not a problem, however, if you fall asleep inside the box. In no case will you simply be asleep. Ordinary sleep, in fact, is not possible. The state in which you enter into is beyond the dichotomy of simply being awake or asleep. Dreaming and recapitulation intermix in a reality that extends far beyond the limits of the box. You can also expect strange effects inside the box: noises, voices, images, or find yourself awake in a reality not that of the box. All of this is normal. Whatever happens, you can be sure that your trip will be to there and back again. In no case should anyone else be allowed inside your box, since it becomes charged with your vibrations, and such an intrusion could cause fright or illness to the intruder. While recapitulating, let your feelings flow freely. If you are in a place where you cannot cry, yell, or laugh, it would be better to look for a more isolated place. Also, you should avoid calling excessive attention to your box and/or the exercise, especially to those who are totally unprepared to understand what these exercises are all about. If someone should ask about it, simply say that it is my meditation box or some such thing. Any attention from outsiders about your work can create obstacles for you. This is the end of that which relates to recapitulation. The petty tyrant. This technique, combining both pragmatism and humor, is one of the most refined of the art of stalking. In its most general form, it can be applied to any situation in which we find ourselves subjected to adverse circumstances against our will, especially those in which our personal ego is affected. These would be situations involving offense, humiliation, or mistreatment. As presented to us by Castaneda, the technique of the petty tyrant represents one of the finest points of stalking. It was developed during the period of the Spanish conquest of Mexico, in which sorcerers and men of knowledge were subjected to tremendous pressure under the yoke of the Spaniards. The majority of sorcerers were killed, but some made use of the situation, out of which grew the art of stalking, thanks to which the survivors were able to come out ahead under the most adverse of circumstances. In developing their art, they made use of the persecution, domination, and mistreatment they received. This taught them how to move about undetected and handle situations in such a way that if they were not killed, they emerged in the end victorious. They converted their dealings with petty tyrants into a matter of strategy. But their most important discovery was that in dealing strategically with petty tyrants, they encountered a very effective remedy for self-importance. Since that is the most energy-consuming activity in the life of an individual, its eradication became one of the prime objectives for stalkers interested in using that energy to enter into the unknown. Don Juan gives a very simple definition of the petty tyrant in The Fire from Within. A petty tyrant is a tormentor, someone who holds the power of life or death over warriors, or simply annoys them to distraction. The stalkers of the colonial era classified petty tyrants in categories according to their level of influence. Far above the human level was put the inexorable force that sustains all that exists, the primary energy of the entire universe, and they called it simply the tyrant. Compared to this force, the most powerful and cruel of men were no more than petty tyrants. Those were put at the top of the list. Petty tyrants have the power of life and death over their victims, according to whim. Little petty tyrants harass and can inflict injury without killing their victims. Small fry petty tyrants are bothersome and exasperating to no end. Naturally, during the Spanish conquests, there were petty tyrants present everywhere. However, the warriors who came later and those of today generally have to make do with little petty tyrants. They were divided into 4 categories. Those who torment with brutality and violence, those who create unbearable apprehension, those who oppress with sadness and gloom, those who torment by making people rage. As related in The Fire from Within, in dealing with petty tyrants, stalkers rely on the first 4 elements of the stalker strategy, which we will look at now. 12. The stalker strategy. These 6 elements have a reciprocal influence on each other. The first 5 have to do with the warrior's private world and are called the attributes of warriorship. The 6th is an element belonging to the outside world. Each element, except for the 5th, is part of the world of the unknown. Control. To tune the spirit when the petty tyrant is trampling on you. Discipline. To gather information on the petty tyrant while he is beating you up. Forbearance. To wait patiently without haste or anxiety. A simple, joyful holding back of the payment due. Timing. To put in action everything that was prepared by control, discipline, and forbearance. Timing opens the gate of the dam. Will. The only element belonging to the realm of the unknown. The petty tyrant. A tormentor who makes life impossible. Warriors use him or her to eliminate their own self-importance and to learn impeccability. To use this technique requires a degree of work, experience, and awareness not apt to be found among beginners. You must maintain a minimum level of sobriety to uphold a strategy in situations where ordinary people are too preoccupied with emotional outbursts to be able to look at the situation from a different perspective. Commentary on the technique. Any encounter with a petty tyrant, even a very small one, is damaging and offensive for ordinary people. However, what really finishes us off is not so much any real damage inflicted, but a feeling of offense and humiliation that arises from taking ourselves too seriously. If we examine the petty tyrants in our lives, we should ask what damage they really cause us. A sober observation will reveal that the real enemy is within ourselves. It is our self-importance that is poking us inside when we find ourselves in a situation that is disagreeable to the ego. A warrior could suffer physical damage, but would in no way be offended by the actions of a petty tyrant. A warrior could be struck physically, but would not feel humiliated. This extra energy not spent on self-importance is precisely the advantage the warrior has over the petty tyrant, whose principal characteristic and weak point is taking himself or herself with deadly seriousness. With this extra energy, a warrior maintains strategy, control, and the ability to observe, then places traps and waits. The warrior triumphs in the end, having achieved the tempering of his or her spirit. An attitude like that, being attentive, taking each situation as a challenge, and dealing with it strategically, is useful not only in confrontations with petty tyrants, but for any situation where we may feel attacked, humiliated, or offended. How many new possibilities are waiting for us if we do not react from our self-importance? The answer can be found only through practice. A person not preoccupied with the mental torture of being offended will be in a better position to avoid any kind of damage. Remember the situation of the man pursued by a lion. He has to run. If he wastes time becoming angry with the lion or feels offended by the abuse received from the animal, he will be lost. In a like manner, in interaction among humans, Our self-importance makes us incapable of acting at just the right moment. Consequently, the results are always predictable. One last word in regard to this technique. It should be used with caution. One must remember that a petty tyrant is an enemy. I mention this because there is always someone who says, "Ah, what luck. I already have my petty tyrant at home. It's my wife or husband." Be careful with this kind of frivolousness, because that situation probably requires honesty and compassion instead of confrontation, even were it done strategically. It must also be remembered that since the attitude of the stalker, not giving in to self-importance, is applicable in any and all circumstances, the petty tyrant must be in a position of power in relation to the stalker, an external factor normally not under our control. We cannot label someone a petty tyrant simply because we don't like him or her. 13. Intending appearances. Working with appearances is another technique of stalking, one that can be as fun as it can be devastating. It has to do with artistic creation in the most authentic sense. It deals to a certain extent with the art of the actor as well as the art of disguise. The principal characteristic of this technique, in which you disguise yourself and or act like someone completely different from your everyday self, is not only to convince the spectators, but also to convince yourself to such a degree that the force of your conviction is transmitted to the spectators. This is a modification of perception, a movement of the assemblage point. Carried to its extreme, the art of pure acting is the art of the sorcerer and the nawal, the art of transformation. What do sorcerers experience when converting into crows and flying away? In principle, they feel as though they fly, feel themselves as crows, seeing and experiencing the world as such. Their secret is that they are capable of modifying their perceptions to match that of a crow, modifying the position of their assemblage point. Their knowledge of sorcery, their conviction, and their years of work allow them to achieve it. But now we have a question, one that Castaneda put to Don Juan long ago. What would a spectator see? An average spectator would probably just see a sleeping person and might think him or her drunk or intoxicated. But a spectator in a state of non-ordinary awareness, or one observing a sorcerer of extraordinary power, one who could force, with the power of his conviction, the movement of the spectator's assemblage point, surely would see a miracle, a person transformed into a crow and flying away. And Castaneda asks the question again, was that real what I felt? To which Don Juan replies, there is no reality other than that which you felt. Reality is a feeling. In the case of true acting, something similar occurs, but to a somewhat lesser extent. Unless, of course, the actor happens to be a man of knowledge, whose particular art is acting, like the Nawal Julian in The Power of Silence. In such a case, what happens is exactly the same. Whoever has experienced a theatrical representation of true art has witnessed this magic. Ordinary reality disappears. Now there is no theater, no actors, no spectators. We have penetrated into an alternate reality thanks to the magic of the actors. They have penetrated this other reality and taken us along with them. They have left behind not only the everyday world, but also their former egos, thereby transforming themselves into entirely new characters who now become real. In the many workshops on stalking I have conducted, we have practiced theater under many diverse conditions, from street theater to secret theater, in which the spectators become as involved as the actors without realizing it, taking it for reality. Our work ranges from the art of mimicry to the representation of works in indigenous communities where Spanish is not spoken. I have discovered, among other things, that true acting functions as a doorway to the other self, to the experience outside the ego, a quality which by itself would make this a practice worthy of exploration. When you convert yourself into your personage, when you are capable of moving your perception to become its living expression, your former ego is revealed in its true dimensions, and your old life as well. You realize that the ego and the world in which you once believed you were trapped was only a mirage, just one more character in one more play, with actors who had forgotten they were acting on stage. This is significant, especially when the play you portray is one of pain or boredom. 14. Actor for a few days. This technique can help a great deal to diminish self-importance, to erase personal history, and to view your everyday life from another perspective. It consists of the following steps. First, you must choose or create a character with very well-defined traits, preferably one with characteristics diametrically opposed to your own. 2. Take time to study the character thoroughly in order to know all details. You have to determine how he or she talks, thinks, feels, dresses, moves, and so forth. 3. Next, prepare your character's entry into the world. Obtain the proper clothing and begin practicing personal manifestations in private, attitudes, vocabulary, interests, activities. 4. Go public and interact, disguised as your character. You must remain active. Go out, converse, visit places, work, according to the role you are playing. It requires a minimum of discipline in order not to slip back into your everyday self. The key is to convince yourself of the role, feel it intimately, and think as the character would. Make it a real person. 15. Disguises. The idea here is to disguise yourself so well that no one is able to recognize you. This, of course, depends not only on a good disguise, but on a good characterization as well. Attitudes, tone of voice, and so forth must all be congruent with the disguise. This should be done so well, not even family members could recognize you. The procedure for this is: 1. Obtain the disguise. 2. Put it on and practice the characterization. 3. Disguised, observe the space in which your ordinary life takes place for a period of at least 1 day. 4. Disguised, interact in that space with the people who know you, but without giving yourself away. This exercise allows you to observe your everyday world, your relationships, the people closest to you, from an unusual perspective. Naturally, Your disguise must be effective and appropriate for interacting among the people who know you, who of course will consider you a stranger. Play the role of a salesman of religious books, a survey taker, a beggar, or a fireman. Any of these would work. Thus disguised, go to your house, your work, to school, and speak with family members, friends, and acquaintances. The more prolonged your interaction and the more areas of your life you observe, the greater will be your results. This exercise may be practiced as often and as long as you like, but at a minimum, it should be at least one whole day. Also, it can be changed periodically. You can change your disguise on different occasions, or go into more depth with the original character. With this exercise, you must be prepared for surprises where they are least expected. 16. Disguised as a member of the opposite sex. This is a variation of the preceding exercise that deserves separate mention due to its singular effect. In The Power of Silence, Don Juan tells us that only in a woman's disguise can any man really learn the art of stalking. It also serves as an excellent way to train yourself in the 4 moods of stalking, which have already been discussed. The exercise consists of disguising yourself, a man, as a woman, so well as to be totally convincing to any observer. Acting as a woman, you must be ruthless, cunning, patient, and sweet, which are often qualities natural to a woman. Since a woman's universe is totally foreign to a man, it is recommended that you practice it thoroughly in order to have an inkling of what being a woman is like. As a woman practicing this exercise, you would, in a similar manner, disguise yourself as a man and act as such. This would involve discovering and emulating facets of the masculine universe, such as mental steadfastness, competitiveness, concern over social recognition, and so on. It should be mentioned that this technique will lose much of its effectiveness if done in a less involving environment, such as among your friends. In order for this exercise to have value, it must be done among strangers who, thanks to your disguise, will really think they are dealing with a woman in the case of a male stalker, or with a man in the case of a female one. This exercise is one that almost invariably will cause the assemblage point to move. 17. Observing tonals. The way this exercise is presented in Tales of Power probably seems too fantastic to some readers. If they cannot see persons as luminous eggs, perhaps the practice seems inaccessible to them. There exists, however, a simplified version for beginners that can give very positive results. Begin by choosing a point from which you can discreetly observe a large number of people going about their daily routines. A subway station, a park, a street, any place where people are found in large numbers. As a beginning stalker, you should be relaxed and simply observe people, avoiding judgments or speculations about how someone looks or acts. Instead, try to sense each person you observe. Stopping the internal dialogue, while not indispensable, is nonetheless highly desirable. Repeating the word nothing, nothing, nothing over and over in your mind will tend to keep out any extraneous thoughts. Your main task here is to concentrate on what you sense from each person. Among other things, you should perceive if the observed person has a good tonal or not. In more mundane terms, it means whether or not the person has a good life, takes care of himself or herself, is strong and happy. You will be lucky indeed if you can find someone like that. If someone appears with the indicated characteristics, try to speak to that person and establish a conversation without revealing the true nature of what you are doing. Your attitude should be natural, avoiding any impulse to corner such a person or to try to establish a relationship unless conditions are favorable for such. And then only if you feel the course of the whole affair is congruent with the nature of your work. Your main concern is merely to corroborate your perception by interacting, all the while remaining alert in order to respond appropriately to whatever the situation may demand of you. You will have to see just how many healthy people you can find.